Cowboy saved Chief's daughter from river. At dawn, 5 tribes arrived on horseback. The redstone sky looked sick, green bruise at the horizon, purple veins of lightning crawling like frantic spiders between thunderheads. Blake Rowan hunched deeper into his duster and urged Shiloh, his black-muzzled Appaloosa, across the creaking timber of Marrow Bridge. Rain exploded on the boards in needles. Wind snapped the saddle strings. He should have stayed at the line shack till dawn, but an unspoken impatience, part loneliness, part restlessness, drove him homeward. Halfway over, Shiloh's ears flicked. Blake heard it too, a sound that didn't belong to storm or timber, a shrill human scream, knifing through the torrent. He reined in, eyes scouring the darkness below. Redstone River, swollen by 3 days of spring thaw, raged beneath the bridge like a thing possessed, chunky with uprooted cedar and foam, the color of buttermilk. Lightning cracked, flash freezing a tableau. A figure swirling in the flood, arms thrashing, hair slick against moon-pale cheeks. Hell! Blake flung himself from the saddle, boots skidding on wet planks. He tore free the coil of rope at his pommel but knew it was worthless. The river moved too fast, the angle was wrong. Another scream, hoarse, short, swallowed by thunder. No time. He dropped the rope, shrugged off his duster, tossed hat and gun belt beside the post, and vaulted the railing. The cold smacked his lungs like a mailed fist. Water sucked him under, spun him twice before he broke the surface sputtering. Rain and river blended into one deafening roar. The current dragged southward toward Cutthroat Falls where no man survived the drop. Blake kicked hard, spotting the girl again in a flicker of lightning, only yards away yet slipping fast. Her dress, a long buckskin shift, had ballooned with water, dragging her under. He flailed closer, lungs screaming, arms pinwheeling. A log slammed his shoulder, spun him sideways. He swallowed silted water, coughed fire. Still he pushed on, teeth clacking from shock. Another flash, the girl's fingertips clawing air. He lunged, missed, lunged again, and caught her forearm. Surprise jolted through him. She gripped back with startling strength. Their eyes locked an instant in the strobing light. Hers were dark, steady, not panicked at all. Then the torrent yanked them apart, rope of flesh stretching between. Blake kicked, pulling her toward a charcoal silhouette of driftwood lodged against a gravel bar. The weight of her dress threatened to drag them both under. He wrapped one arm around her waist, hooking fingers into a knot of fringe, and frog-kicked until boots scraped grit. They collapsed onto the bar, half submerged. Water sloshed around their hips, but at least stopped stealing their breath. Blake hauled the girl farther up the narrow spit until the current slapped only at their boots. He rolled her onto her side. She coughed river water, chest heaving. When she tried to rise, dizziness folded her back down. Blake's heart still hammered like a forge. He sat on his heels, starring vision tunneling. Easy, miss. His voice rasped like a saw. You're safe. She turned her head, rain stringing from her lashes. The storm's roar seemed to hush for one heartbeat when she spoke. You have altered the river's covenant, Blake Rowan. He froze. They had never met, yet she spoke his name, first and last, soft, precise, without accent. A prickling chill crept beneath his soaked shirt. Do I know you? She ignored the question, pushing wet strands from her face. She couldn't have been more than 19. High cheekbones, a small scar above her left brow, eyes the dark of wet cedar bark. She sat upright, palms pressed to the gravel as if steadying spinning earth. Anyone would have jumped, Blake muttered, more to test his own voice than convince her. Lightning flared. She studied him in the white glare, rain tapping her shoulders like impatient fingers. That is where you are mistaken. At midday tomorrow, the land will answer what you did here. She reached to her neck, unclasped a thin leather thong, bearing a single winter foxtooth. The fang gleamed milky blue. She extended it. Water sheeted down her arm, but her hand was strangely steady. Blake hesitated, then accepted the tooth. Warmth pulsed through the tiny object, as though an animal still lived inside it. Why give me this? It will keep breath inside you until noon, she said simply, then tipped her head as if listening to a voice submerged beneath a storm. I must depart before the river remembers its anger. She rose, improbably graceful after near drowning, and walked toward the dark tree line bordering the gravel bank. Blake, stunned, pushed up to follow. Hold on, miss! At least tell me your name. She half turned, silhouette framed by distant lightning. Serafina Roancloud. The name rolled like thunder, yet felt rehearsed, ceremonial. Remember the tooth, Blake Rowan. Midday. Then she slipped into the timber, her buckskin dress vanishing among the silver trunks. Blake hustled 3 paces after her before the cold bit his bones and reason returned. He was shirtless, weaponless, soaking, miles from home. He looked down at the fox tooth glimmering in his palm, rainwater beating off its enamel. Breath inside you until noon? Nonsense. Yet the warmth radiating from the fang made him wonder. He hiked the riverbank, found a narrower ford upstream, and splashed across, teeth rattling. By the time he reached Marrow Bridge again, Shiloh still waited, reins looped over a post, ears flattened from lightning. Blake swung into the saddle, retrieved his duster, and began the long ride through sodden cottonwoods toward his cabin 2 miles west. Behind him, the river thundered a private verdict he couldn't decipher. An hour later, he pushed inside the one-room cabin. Lantern flame trembled as he stripped off soaked clothes dried by the stove. The fox tooth he placed on the table, unable to keep from touching it every few minutes, verifying its improbable warmth. Outside, thunder drifted north. Rain softened to a tired patter. Yet unease thickened inside the walls. How had she known his name? Who spoke of river covenants? Why did her eyes hold neither panic nor gratitude, but something weightier, like verdict delivered? Blake lay on his cot at last, blankets around shoulders. Sleep refused him. Through the cracked shutter, he watched the tooth on the table, half expecting it to glow. Midnight crept past, then 1, then 2. Each hour, he told himself the same lie. Come daylight, this night would shrink to a half-remembered dream. But as the eastern sky paled and the storm smell cooled, Blake Rowan's pulse still beat to river rhythm, because deep down he sensed the girl was right. The land would indeed answer at noon, and whatever came would demand far more courage than plunging into any flood. Sunlight came late to Redstone, crawling over the buttes like a wounded coyote. Blake Rowan greeted it with a bucket of well water slammed across his face, hoping shock would drown the questions gnawing since the flood. He'd slept in bursts, each time jolting up to touch the winter fox tooth, half certain it had cooled. It hadn't. The fangs still pulsed with faint warmth, as if measuring the hours to noon. He saddled Shiloh, worked the fence line, split cedar for the stove. Normal chores done with abnormal urgency, as though routine might muzzle the storm he felt marching toward him. By mid-morning, even the birds seemed to hush, and a wind smelling of distant sage began to rise from every direction at once. Shiloh's ears twitched north, then east, then south. Blake followed the gelding's gaze and saw it. 5 pillars of dust blooming on the horizon, each from a different point of the compass. He counted riders, too many for a stray hunting band, moving too deliberately to be random travelers. Noon's promise had arrived early. Blake tied off Shiloh, wiped his palms on his jeans, and positioned himself at the split-rail gate. The first column broke from the haze. Saddle blankets dyed Lakota turquoise, lances tipped with crow feathers, swaying like river grass. Close behind rolled Arapaho sun yellow, Pawnee green, Kiowa midnight blue, Cheyenne crimson. 50 riders in all, yet they moved with the hush of church bells. When the convoys reached his outer fence, 5 elders dismounted in perfect unison, boots sinking into powdery earth. They were different in stature. One stooped, one lithe, one broad-shouldered. But each wore the same expression, grave courtesy, as though standing at the portal of judgment. Blake stepped forward, hat in hand. "Welcome to Rowan Ranch," he managed, throat sandpaper dry. The foremost elder, a Lakota whose braids were threaded with gray fox fur, tapped the butt of his ash spear once, wood against dirt. The sound carried like a drumbeat. "I am Gray Antler," he said. "These are Morning Shell, Laughing Brook, Falcon Watcher, and Iron Mollusk. We come as the covenant foretold." Behind them a young rider swung down, bearing a rawhide bundle. Another held something wrapped in bison cloth. Another carried a quiver heavy with eagle feathers. Gifts, Blake realized, yet none of the faces looked celebratory. Gray Antler advanced 2 steps. You pulled Seraphina Roancloud from the river's hunger. The 5 nations owe you life debt. He signaled Morning Shell, who unfolded a robe of white bison, a rarity bordering myth. The hide shimmered ivory under the high sun. Beadwork rippled like starlight. Laughing Brook produced a warbow of polished elm, its grip inlaid with chipped obsidian symbols. This bow belonged to my grandfather's grandfather, the Pawnee elder said, never before given beyond our blood. Falcon Watcher laid down a flute carved of silvered bone. Iron Mollusk placed a hand axe, haft bound with meteor iron older than any border. Each gift made a small thunder when it met Blake's porch boards, echoing inside his ribs. He lifted both hands. Elders, I can't accept. But you must, Gray Antler cut in, not unkindly. The prophecy demands witness and tribute. Seraphina is what the old tongues call bridge daughter. Her rescue by an outsider begins a path either to lasting peace or to a war that will stain rivers black. Blake swallowed. The words felt unreal, yet the gift sat heavy and undeniable at his feet. I'm just a rancher, he said. I saw someone drowning. Anyone. Not anyone, Iron Mollusk interrupted, voice gravel deep. 3 white riders crossed that bridge last night. None stopped. Only the 4th did. Heat crawled Blake's neck. He remembered hoofprints circling his water barrels at dawn. Then what happens now? An air colder than river water washed over the gathering. Gray Antler's gaze shifted eastward, where a new dust bloom rose, darker, narrower, moving fast. Now comes the part the prophecy leaves in shadow, he said. Raging Coyote rides with men who paint their faces for final deeds. He believes killing the bridge bearer will freeze the world in the old shape. How many? Blake asked, though he feared the answer. 50, Falcon Watcher said, and they gather others as they ride. Blake exhaled through his teeth. 50 warriors in addition to the 50 before him, and he had 3 rifles in the cabin, 2 half-patched. Farmers lived 5 miles south, but they'd bolt shutters, not saddle up. Morning Shell stepped closer, eyes bright behind age-lined lids. We would fight them here if you wish, but blood on your soil summons more blood. There is another path. She turned, pointing to Blake's empty horse corral. At dusk, let our fires burn beneath your roof beam. Call a council. The bridge bearer must choose whether the covenant lives. Choose? Blake felt the fox tooth pulse against his chest pocket, as if agreeing. Shiloh tossed his head, sensing tension crackle like static. Distant thunder, not storm thunder, rumbled where Raging Coyote advanced. He looked from the white bison robe to the elders' worn faces, then down the lane toward his cabin. He thought of Seraphina's calm eyes in the flood, of her promise that the land would answer at midday. Noonlight now gilded the gunmetal sky. The land was indeed speaking. Blake lifted his hat, set it firm. Build your council fire, he said. No one draws steel on Rowan ground unless I fall first. Gray Antler's shoulders eased a fraction. He tapped spear to earth once more, a respectful salute, and the procession flowed into Blake's yard, dismounting, unpacking kettle drums and cedar logs as if they'd rehearsed the placement of every stone. The gifts remained on the porch, quiet as sentries. Above them, thunderheads tightened like a noose around the sun, heralding whoever, whatever came next. Firelight licked the twilight as Blake Rowan's yard transformed into a cedar-ringed council ground. 5 elders sat on buffalo robes around a low pit, their silhouettes flickering against his cabin wall. Drums thumped, slow, steady, like a second heart inside the night. On a plank by the door, the white bison robe and meteoric tomahawk glowed amber under sparks drifting up the flue. Blake stood at the edge of the circle, coat off, fox-tooth charm warm against his sternum. Every sense felt sharpened, scent of pine pitch, hiss of sap, even the distant creak of his windmill turning in the hush between drum beats. The elders chanted an invocation to Stone and Storm, words braided from 5 languages yet flowing as one. Then, without footfall or warning, Seraphina Roancloud stepped into the firelight. Her soaked buckskin shift had been replaced by a robe of river reed fibers that shimmered green in the flames. Around her neck hung an emerald-veined stone, no bigger than a man's fist, lashed in rawhide netting. Its surface pulsed a soft inner light, as if lit by trapped dawns. Blake felt the pulse answer the tooth at his chest. Gray Antler's chant dwindled, all eyes fixed on Seraphina. She raised the stone high. The drumbeat ceased on an unspoken cue, leaving crackling logs the only sound. "I bring the Riverstone heart, keeper of the covenant," she announced. "It has slept 3 generations, waiting for an outsider to raise it from water, an outsider who acts without barter." Blake's breath fogged in the cooling air. The elders nodded. They had expected this moment. He had not. Seraphina faced him. "My drowning was no accident," she said, voice carrying farther than seemed possible. "The prophecy required a selfless deed seen by the river spirits. I threw myself into the flood because I knew you would leap." A murmur ran through the elders' ranks, respect mixed with unease. Blake absorbed the blow. "You risked your life on a gamble?" "On faith," she corrected gently. "Faith that mercy still lives west of the Platte." Thunder of hooves cut across her words. Torchlight bloomed beyond the fence. 50 horses, scarlet handprints on their haunches. At their head rode a man in a split-horn elk mask, black paint slashed across the eye holes. Raging Coyote. He reined in just beyond the fire glow, voice sharp as flint. "Remove that rock from the white man's hand before it poisons our future." His warriors fanned into a blood-red crescent. Spear points glimmered like teeth. Seraphina didn't flinch. She held the stone tighter. The glow deepened, igniting veins inside like lightning captured in jade. Blake stepped forward. "This is my land. No steel will be drawn here tonight." "Then die with your land," Raging Coyote sneered, swinging down from his horse. Warriors advanced a single pace, spears rattling. A new sound shattered the standoff, bugle brass slicing the dusk. To the west, 30 cavalry troopers trotted into view, carbines across saddles, sabers clinking. Lanterns bobbed on their stirrups, painting brass halos on blue coats. Major Jonathan Pike rode front, jaw granite hard. "Hold all weapons," Pike shouted. "By territorial order, this assembly is trespass and potential insurrection." Within seconds, Blake's yard became a 3-point star of tension. Elders at the fire, Raging Coyote's spear wall, Pike's rifle line. The flames popped, someone's horse stamped, otherwise silence ruled. Seraphina moved first. She crossed the bare earth to Blake, drew his hand outward, and pressed the Riverstone heart into his palm. Heat flooded his arm to the shoulder. The stone's glow swelled, pouring emerald light over every face, native and soldier, elder and warrior. A wind with no source swept the yard, rippling cloaks and banners. Then vision struck. Blake saw wagons burning beneath black smoke, cavalry rifles spitting into teepee rows, dead children, parched fields, rivers choked with ash. The scene flipped, a marketplace of canvas stalls where Cheyenne beadwork traded for settler wheat, school children reciting lessons in 2 tongues, a stone monolith etched with 5 symbols standing unguarded because no guard was needed. The images weren't dreams, they were choices laid bare. Around him, men staggered, clutching temples. Major Pike's pupils dilated, Gray Antler's lips parted in horrified wonder. Even Raging Coyote's shoulders trembled. Steel groaned. Pike's troopers struggled to keep carbines raised. The metal seemed to double in weight. Across the yard, spear hafts dipped earthward, as though gravity had thickened. No one commanded. Something within the light dictated that weapons find rest. The visions faded. The glow dimmed to a breathing ember inside Blake's fist. He realized his knees had buckled. He stood only because Seraphina braced his elbow. Around the circle, warriors, soldiers, and elders drew ragged breaths, as if each heart now beat in uneasy synchrony. Raging Coyote ripped the elk mask free, sweat running through war paint. "Sorcery," he hissed, but his voice faltered. The fear in his eyes was human, not demon. "Show me steel that does not lie heavy, and I will fight." No spear answered him. Major Pike lowered his carbine fully, barrel pointing to dirt. He stared at Blake. Accusation melded into something like pleading. What have you put in our heads, Rowan? Not Rowan, Seraphina said softly. The river stone shows only what we already carry. Future born from the seeds in our hands. Gray antler rose, joints popping. The council remains unbroken. The bridge bearer has revealed the paths. Now each heart must choose. Night deepened. Stars blinked awake behind bruised clouds. In the crackle of dying logs and horses' uneasy snorts, Blake felt the stone throb one last time. Waiting, judging. Somewhere beyond the ridge, another storm rumbled. But it was nothing compared to the one about to break here, in the quiet that follows revelation. The hush after revelation felt louder than war drums. Riders, soldiers, elders, all stood frozen in the green ghost light, breathing from the riverstone heart in Blake Rowan's hand. A distant rifle shot clawed the silence. The bullet struck the stone dead center. It did not shatter so much as burst, scattering thumbnail-sized shards into a widening sphere of emerald sparks. Blake staggered. Every fragment punched through shirts and buckskin, through uniform wool and painted skin, embedding in chests like seed pearls of fire. Men cried out, then stilled, because the shards were painless, warm, alive. On the ridge behind the cavalry line, a lone officer lowered his smoking Springfield. Colonel Silas Dryden, hard jaw, white mustache, uniform braid gleaming, spurred downslope, voice flint cold. Major Pike, arrest the traitor Rowan and seize that sorceress rock. Major Pike's carbine remained muzzle down. Sir, the stone's gone, and these people stand under parley. Dryden's glare swept the yard. Parley! I see armed hostiles and a yard full of hypnotized recruits. He leveled his rifle at Blake. Rowan, on your knees. Shards inside 100 hearts glowed brighter, sinking to a single pulse, thrum, that rippled outward like wind through wheat. Pike's horse shied. Warriors murmured as spear points dipped again. Even raging Coyote flinched, as though the stone splinter beneath his ribs throbbed with judgment. Seraphina stepped between Blake and the rifle. Her river reed robe flickered emerald where shards glimmered beneath. The Covenant cannot be killed by lead, Colonel. It lives in choice. Choice is the luxury of victors, Dryden sneered, cocking the hammer. Step aside. A voice rasped from the fire circle. Iron Mollusk, the Cheyenne elder. So speaks the man who never felt the flood. He rose, lifting a charred brand. Its glow revealed a shard shining in the hollow of his throat. Shoot and feel what we feel. Your children weeping over ground salted by your orders. Dryden's finger twitched, but the weight of unseen futures dragged on it like iron shackles. Gray Antler motioned to two younger riders. They produced a buckskin scroll, beeswax sealed and ringed with 5 tribal glyphs and 3 territorial seals. Bridge bearer, he called to Blake, add your mark. Let the treaty bind with the shard's witness. Blake's pulse hammered beneath his own glowing splinter. He accepted the scroll, hands steady despite Dryden's rifle. The parchment outlined shared patrols, open trade lanes, sacred site protection, radical notions inked before any white politician dared speak them aloud. At the bottom line waited a blank for an outsider of unimpeachable courage. Blake dipped a quill in elderberry ink and signed B. Rowan. Major Pike swung out of the saddle. Under lantern flame, his face looked 10 years older. Colonel, he said softly, Rowan just chose a path that spares soldiers from burying more friends. I'll stand with that. He signed beneath Blake's name, rank, and regiment. A tremor rippled through Dryden's men. 3 privates stepped forward, rifles reversed, and planted bayonets into the earth. Silent refusal. More followed until half the line stood disarmed, blue coats washed emerald by shard light. Across the fire, Raging Coyote's jaw worked like a man chewing glass. The shard in his chest beat against bone. He removed his war-painted elk mask, eyes glistening with something Blake had never expected to see: exhaustion. Slowly, he stabbed his spear butt into the ground and pressed a bloody thumbprint beside the cavalry signatures. Blood feeds ghosts, not children, he whispered. The air changed. Horses exhaled in unison. Night insects dared chirp again. Only Dryden seemed unmoved. He swung his rifle toward Seraphina. Prophecy or not, my duty is... A pistol's click cut him off. Pike's sidearm pointed at Dryden's chest. Sir, you are relieved for misconduct. For a heartbeat, Blake feared the old soldier would pull anyway. Career, doctrine, pride all coiled behind the trigger. But the shard lodged near Dryden's heart glowed dull gold, and his rifle muzzle dipped like a weary flag furling. Two troopers guided him back, weaponless, shoulders slumped. Seraphina raised her hands. The covenant is sealed by witness and willingness, yet its spirit needs a vessel. She knelt, gathering the remaining shards now dimming in the dust. Elders? Morning Shell fetched a cedar bowl of river water. One by one the elders dropped shards into the bowl. Each hissed, melted, and refused into a wafer-thin disk that floated on the surface, pulsing soft green. Iron Mollusk recited, Fire birthed it, water calmed it, mercy shaped it. So long as the disk rests unbroken among both peoples, no blade shall prosper that seeks to divide them. He placed the disk into Blake's hands. Its heat no longer seared. It felt like a steady heartbeat, a promise rather than a threat. Gray Antler spread his arms to the circle of faces. Warrior, soldier, settler, elder. Let no man here claim ignorance. The stone has weighed us all and found enough hope to proceed. He turned to Blake. Bridgebearer, the night belongs to you. Blake swallowed. Words felt small, but silence felt cowardly. I'm no prophet, he said, voice rough. Only a fool who jumped in a river. But if a fool's courage can keep rifles quiet and let children sleep, I'll stay foolish till my dying day. A low chuckle spun around the yard, easing tension better than any speech. Raging Coyote grunted agreement. Pike holstered his pistol. Lanterns were lowered. Stars took their places. The last act of the night came without ceremony. Warriors and soldiers shared water skins, passed bread, dared trade a few halting words. Somewhere a trooper fumbled a harmonica tune. A Kiowa youth answered on bone flute. Laughter, nervous, fragile, rose like sparks into the dark. Blake watched from his porch, the fused disc warm in his palms, thinking how quickly a bullet could have turned this yard into a grave, and how a handful of glowing shards had instead sown something perilously new. Peace that would need guarding every dawn hereafter. Thunder grumbled far off, a tired echo of the river's rage. But above Rowan Ranch the sky lay clear, and for the first time since the storm, Blake felt the land breathe easy. 6 months bled off the calendar like sunset light fading from canyon walls, and the raw prairie surrounding Blake Rowan's homestead changed faster than a colt in spring. Where buffalo grass once waved unbroken, wagon ruts now curved toward stovepipe chimneys, and the evening air carried scents of cedar smoke, fry bread, and freshly ground coffee. An unlikely recipe for a brand new settlement the territorial mapmakers had begun calling Rowan Crossing. Blake's porch post still leaned a hair to the west, but the yard no longer looked lonely. A two-flag mast, stars and stripes above, 5-feather tribal standard below, flapped in companionable rhythm. Kids of all skin shades shrieked around a half-built schoolhouse, their improvised game involving a chicken feather, a stick, and rules that morphed every 60 seconds. Beside the well, Major Jonathan Pike, now plain Mr. Pike, hauled buckets for a Pawnee carpenter, laughing about sore shoulders instead of casualty lists. At the square's center stood the riverstone disc, mounted waist-high on a cedar plinth. By noon it looked like polished river glass, but at dawn and dusk it pulsed faint green, as though remembering the shards that birthed it. Folks touched it before council meetings, before marriages, before horse trades, sometimes just to quiet nightmares nobody spoke of. Blake dismounted, patting Shiloh's neck. He'd spent the morning ferrying sacks of Kiowa sunflower meal to the Army outpost 10 miles south, part of a new supply barter that kept soldiers fed and tribes earning coin. Funny how a man who once measured wealth in cattle now counted success by piece, kept between neighbors. He strode toward the livery, his livery now, where tools hung in organized rows and orphans from both cultures earned pennies oiling harness. The oldest boy, Micah, waved a grease-blackened rag. Mr. Rowan, we reshoed that Kiowa pony, the one that threw sparks. Never seen metal so soft. Good work, Blake said, ruffling Micah's hair. Tell the owner first thing. Inside the stable office sat Serafina Roancloud, legs crossed, robe exchanged for a calico dress and scuffed riding boots. She cradled a ledger, scribbling grain tallies in both English and Cheyenne syllabary. A turquoise band gleamed at her wrist, the only hint of the river priestess she'd once seemed. Figured I'd find you hiding from the sun, Blake teased. Hiding from bad arithmetic, she replied, sliding the book shut. The council meets at sundown. We need your vote on the mill levy. Always another vote, he said. But first, the governor's telegram. He handed her the folded paper he'd carried in his coat since dawn. Serafina read silently, her lips curved. The Senate committee arrives in 2 weeks, she translated. They'll assess Rowan Crossing as a pilot model for integrated governance. She laughed, a sound brighter than flute notes. Washington thinks we're a science experiment. Let them come, Blake said, leaning against the desk. We'll show them fences where kids paint murals instead of danger signs. Serafina's gaze settled on the disc visible through the doorway. It still hums for you? Only when storms roll in, he admitted. Feels like a heartbeat, reminding me the covenant's alive, not carved in granite. Alive things need guardians. She closed the ledger and stood, all business. Which is why the council wants you to accept the marshal's badge. Blake groaned. I'm a fair hand with horses, not statutes. Law here isn't about punishment, she reminded him. It's reminding folk of the promise they made in your yard. Before Blake could protest further, a commotion rippled outside. Voices raised, hoofbeats sliding in dust. He stepped into sunlight to find Colonel Dryden, stripped of rank insignia but riding tall, raining hard near the disc. 2 ex-soldiers, now settlers, intercepted him, but Dryden lifted a hand in peace. Rowan, he called, voice weather-worn. I've come to see the stone. Pike appeared from the well, features wary yet resolute. Blake nodded permission. Dryden dismounted, boots heavy on packed earth. The crowd hushed. The man who once tried to break the covenant now faced its emblem. He removed gloves, touched trembling fingers to the disc. A faint green ripple pulsed outward. His shoulders sagged. Whether from shame or relief, Blake couldn't tell. I was wrong, Dryden said, words gravel rough. The army offered me reinstatement. On condition I testify this treaty's a farce. I resigned instead. He glanced at Pike, then at Serafina. If you'll have me, I'd rather build fence than burn it. Blake extended a calloused hand. Dryden grasped it. The watching crowd exhaled like a single creature. Serafina lifted her voice. Anyone ready to work is welcome, so long as they remember the river taught us mercy. A Kiowa woman stepped forward with a hammer. A German settler handed Dryden a tool belt. The circle dispersed into conversation. The moment crystallized into one more story for children who would never know how close their parents came to killing each other. Dusk bled lavender across the prairie. Lanterns winked to life along Main Street. Really just 2 wagon wheel ruts flanked by rammed earth huts and clappered stores. The council bell clanged from the half-finished steeple, summoning members. Blake lingered by the disc, hand resting on its cool face. Under his palm, the stone vibrated, a soft murmur, like distant water sliding over rock. He thought of that night, lightning, icy river, a girl's steady eyes, a fool's jump that rewrote destinies. Serafina joined him, notebook tucked under arm. Regret anything yet? He chuckled. Only that I didn't nail my fence board straighter. Seems half the territory walks past him now. Pause. No, not a second. Thunder rolled far off, a summer storm slewing over the buttes. The disc brightened, casting green fireflies onto their boots. Children squealed, trying to catch the light. Blake pocketed the fox tooth, still with him always, and tipped his hat toward the gathering clouds. Storm's coming, he said. Serafina slipped her arm through his. We've weathered worse. Shoulders squared, they strode to the council hall where oil lamps and eager voices awaited, ready to debate taxes, bridge planks, schoolhouse paint. Problems of a town that had chosen the harder future, the one built not by river rage or rifle barrels, but by the steady, stubborn work of people who decided that mercy, once awakened, should never sleep again.